Good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed lunch. I've got the pleasure to share some insights with you about a pretty amazing project that's going on right now in the European Union that, opinion, will be very, very fundamental for the digital future of Europe. And I hope it will also influence similar developments all over the globe. And as you will see, there's also a lot of OpenID in it. But we will come back later to that. So let's start with what is eIDAS. eIDAS is, first of all, a regulation. So it's law. It is law that is already in effect in the European Union since 2014. And the original regulation focuses on enabling cross-border use of electronic identification means and electronic signatures. So the European Union is composed of 27 member states. They're all sovereign states, but the European Union's mission is to make sure that trade, travel, communication works seamlessly across all the different member states, and that's one of the digital cornerstones. And the new regulation underway, as we are speaking, eIDAS 2, or the European Digital Identity Wallet, significantly extends the scope of the regulation to cover elements of what's being referred to as digital decentralized identity, self-sovereign identity, the three-party model. There are different names for it. But basically what it is focusing on is enabling citizens and inhabitants in the European Union to use wallets to manage all sorts of digital attestations, which is very fundamental to the digitization of our society. Because we want to move, or we want to transfer or transform anything that we have right now in plastic and paper to prove things about us into digital equivalents. And in the end, every member state in the European Union under this regulation is obliged to provide at least one wallet to its citizens and inhabitants. So the European Digital Wallet, Identity Wallet, or EUDI wallet for short, will allow the users to identify themselves. That's the core use case, cross-border. Or to prove age, for example. So data minimization is a huge thing, right? Latest with the GDPR introduction in the European Union. So having minimal data sets, for example, for age verification is an important aspect. And this is, I guess, the focus and the main focus of this activity is really storing, maintaining, and presenting all sorts of digital attestation. I just listed some examples here. Might be medical prescriptions, driver's licenses, diplomas, and so on. So you see, this is not really only about identity. This is about any kind of authoritative data signed by someone or some entity that can be used in different use cases. And then the European Digital Identity Wallet shall also enable the users to sign contracts in an easier way than it is possible as of today. Because use of electronic signatures, even though enabled already under eIDAS 1, is not on a level where the European Union would like to see it. Because in the end, if you want to close contracts, if you want to do business online, you need to make sure it's also legally safe. And so one of the requirements to the EUDI wallet is to make those kind of electronic signatures a commodity, which it is not today, with the exception of Italy. They use electronic signatures all over the place. And the wallet also shall authorize payments, because basically payments is an everyday use case, and it nicely fits into the scope of a wallet. There are three core concepts that were defined by the legislation and are put forward that define the kind of credentials more precisely than just talking about credentials or digital credentials or verifiable credentials. Basically, all those three concepts you can perceive as being verifiable credentials, but we have different sorts of them. First of all, there are person identity data. personal identity data, or called a short PID, is in the end the identity, right? The identity must be provided on the level of assurance high, which is the highest level of assurance we have in the European Union, but it can also be eID means on a lower assurance level. And then there are electronic attestation of attributes. And this is in the end the bucket where all the other attestation fit in. So whether this is a driver's license, medical prescriptions, or whatsoever, those are the other attestations. They are typically linked to a person, either through a technical binding, through a device binding, or in the majority of cases, through claims to a PID, right? So you need to present both of them. I guess you remember the vaccination certificates during the COVID pandemic. Basically, those are EAAs, and they typically have a claim or a couple of claims that tie them to your identity. So you need to present them, at least legally, no one did that, with your ID card or passport or something like that. And then there are qualified electronic attestation of attributes. Those are special EAAs that are issued by what we call trust service providers. They underlie a certain regulation and fulfill higher requirements than other EAA providers. Just to give you an impression of the size and ambition of the project, this slide shows you the different elements of the initiative and also the timeline. So in the upper part of the slide, you see the legislation. As I said, it's law. And it is law being negotiated between the different centers of power in the European Union, which are the member states, the Commission, and the Parliament. And this process is still ongoing. We expect the Parliament to, in the end, give its blessing to the legislation end of this month. And then the clock starts ticking, and 2 years after that, all the member states must fulfill the regulation. So you see it's much longer than 25, but I ran out of space on the slide. So, and then on the next level, you see the work going on regarding technical specifications. So in previous regulation, the European Commission did the legislation, but did not really focus on technical interoperability. For obvious reasons, that changes with eIDAS 2, because every of the member states, 27 member states, issue at least one wallet. Some of them will also have a wallet ecosystem, which means we have 27 plus wallets, and we need to make sure they are interoperable, which means we need to somehow settle on technical standards to make that happen. And one of the forums where that's going to happen is the so-called expert group, where member state representatives work on those technical standards, and they publish something that's called the Architecture and Reference Framework. I will dig into that in a minute. And after that, there are so-called implementing acts. This is a bit between legislation and technology, where there are some documents listing the technical standards that need to be used to implement the legislation. And then in the third row, we see the reference wallet application. The European Commission decided to fund the development of an open source wallet to make it easier for the member states to develop their own wallet. The reference wallet application, for good reasons, is called reference, because all the member states need to tie that into their existing eID system and ecosystem. So for example, we in Germany have a very, very specific way we deal with identities today, and we need to integrate that with our wallet ourselves. But since we all use the same interfaces that are defined in the ARF and beyond, we can make sure that all the wallets can talk to all the relying parties and all the issuers across the union. And then we've got the large-scale pilots, and that's a quite interesting concept. So basically, it's like agile development. So we put the wallets and the implementations to a test. Each of those large-scale pilots is, in the end, aims at testing certain use cases across different member states for feasibility, user experience, and all that stuff. So each of those four, I won't go into the details of all the four projects. Each of those projects focuses on a certain use case and will then conduct the transactions with all the wallets provided by all the member states across all the member states. That's a quite interesting thing. The one missing link is that the feedback from those pilots might go back to, might be fed into the technical standards development, but not into the legislation. That's the missing link, right? So we consider the legislation done after it's gone through the parliament. Let's see. Okay. Let's dig more into the technical details. So as I said, the architecture reference framework is the place where we define the architecture, the concept, and reference the standards that shall be used for implementing the EUDI wallet. That is then, in the end, informing the development of the implementing acts. This slide is very central to an understanding of how the European Digital Identity Wallet ecosystem will look like. On the left-hand side, you see more the supervisory bodies. I will skip that for a moment. You just need to understand that every European Digital Identity Wallet needs to be certified. So there will be certification criteria, there will be supervisory bodies, there will be conformance auditing bodies, and they will, in the end, certify the wallet. So in the center of this diagram, you see the EUDI wallet instance. That's where all the attestations and all the PIDs are being managed. On the left-hand side, you see all the different issuers that, in the end, provide the user with the different kinds of attestations. So the PID issuer for the identity, EEA for all sorts of attestations, qualified, non-qualified, and the QES is the qualified electronic signature issuer. So those are the providers that support or allow the user to electronically sign documents. And all this, in the end, all this data flows into the wallet and can then, at the discretion of the user, be presented to the relying party. So from a technical standpoint, the main difference to federated identity, as it is being done using OpenID Connect, for example, is that the issuer on the left-hand side is not involved in the presentation of the credential. So it's at the discretion of the user without the issuer knowing where it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and what is being presented. And the user can also decide to combine attestations in a certain transaction, which is very useful. So for example, you can, as I mentioned, present your PID and your vaccination certificate in one transaction, which is very, very convenient. On the bottom, you see trust list providers. Why is that important? You see they in the end interconnect all the different parties. On the right-hand side, you see the relying party. The relying party is the party that receives the data in the end, but the relying party also needs to understand whether a certain attestation was issued by someone, some entity, that is obliged to do so. So if you, for example, receive a mobile driver's license, you might want to know whether that mobile driver's license was issued by an authoritative issuer for the respective member state. And this is, in the end, all managed using trust lists. The technology that is being used for trust lists is not decided yet. There are different options, X509 certificates, and so on. But there needs to be this kind of trust list. Let's take a look into the technical standards that were selected. As I said in the beginning, there's a lot of OpenID in the EUDI wallet. So I'm really proud that OpenID for verified credentials, I would say the latest brainchild of the OpenID Foundation, made its way into the ERF. So it's used for the issuance of EAAs and PIDs. It's used for the presentation of EAAs and PIDs in the online channel. And it's used for pseudonymous authentication through SIAP v2. And then we have ISO 18013-5, which is the protocol that has been chosen for proximity presentation. So if you are on a point of sale scenario or in a, I would say, police control scenario, then you're going to use the ISO standard to present your attestations. On the format side, we have two different credential formats that can be used for representing PIDs and EAAs. One of them is the selective disclosure JOT, which is the latest variant of JOTs, JSON Web Tokens, that can be selectively disclosed using a salted hash approach. And there is one equivalent in the ISO world, which is the MDoc, the mobile document, which uses the binary encoding for more or less achieving similar things. So this is basically the technology set we are working on or we use. And the PIDs, and that has been defined PIDs need to be issued in both formats. You might ask why. Potentially, the honest answer is we couldn't come to an agreement which is the format we want to use. So we use both going forward. And perhaps through the LSPs, we will learn perhaps whether we can settle on one of them. Right now, one of the technical limitations is that the ISO protocols can only present MDoc documents. So if you wanna use JSON credential, they can only be presented right now through the online channel. This is some limitation we need to fix, and there are different ways to pursue that. So OpenID has a BLE variant as well. That would be one way to also present other credential formats in the online channel. Another option would be to work with ISO folks to extend or enhance the capability of the ISO protocol to also support other credential formats. And then we could perhaps, for every use case, settle on a single credential format. But until that is achieved, we go with 2 different credential formats. There are a lot of topics still under discussion. We had a chat before my presentation, and my personal assessment is what we do here is a really, really huge undertaking. And no one has done that before at the scale that the European Union wants to do it. 300+ million people using wallets for more or less almost any use case, and cultural differences whatsoever. So it's pretty hard to really come to conclusions and to settle on certain technologies. But it's fun to be part of that process, I have to say. So what's open right now? I mentioned we use SDJOT. SDJOT, in the end, is a packaging format. So you can selectively disclose JSON-based objects. The payload, the format of the payload is still under discussions. So you might have heard about W3C verifiable credentials. That's something that has been used widely in the last couple of years. But W3C verifiable credentials have some limitations that we run into when using it. And that's why there is an alternative, which is called SDJOT-VC. So we're now discussing which one to use. Then there is all sorts of trust management. Trust in the wallet. So the issuer wants to know that it can trust the wallet. The relying party wants to know whether it can trust the issuer. The wallet and the user wants to know whether it can trust the relying party. This all needs to be sorted out on a deep technical level, and there's still some way to go how that works. Also, linking between PIDs and EAAs or QAAs. I briefly touched on that. You can do that via attributes. You can use claims for that. You can do a cryptographic binding, and there are very sophisticated proposals on the table to do a cryptographic indirect binding, which is very privacy preserving, but also very complex. And no, it's not a German proposal. I'm very glad to mention that. And there is online pseudonymous authentication. I mean, for those of you that know SIOV2, for example, that is one approach you could utilize for that. But there are member states that today already have very sophisticated pseudonymous authentication systems that work differently, and they would like to pursue that in the context of European Digital Identity Wallet. I absolutely understand that. So we need to somehow figure out whether we can have some common ground, at least on the interface level for that. Let me dig into the first topic to give you some more insights. So we have been using W3C verifiable credentials for quite a while now. And the problem we saw in conjunction with them are mainly, first of all, there's no selective disclosure support, at least for JOT-VCs. There is selective disclosure support to some extent for data integrity proofs, but data integrity has proven to be very fragile and not really secure. So that's a real showstopper. That was one of the reasons why the development of selective disclosure JOT started 1.5 years ago. A lot of verification mechanisms, signature algorithms, and so on are very underspecified in the W3C spec, meaning that there are different flavors you can implement those credentials in, and this really hurts interoperability, right? And there are inefficiencies in the way presentations are being prepared, and also duplication of information, and so on and so on. So it's not really an optimal design. So that's what I want to get across. And so SDJOT-VC is an alternative. It's a specification, a draft that is being brought forward by the Internet Engineering Task Force in the OAuth group, OAuth working group more specifically. And just to give you an example, on the left-hand side, you see a W3C verifiable credential, and each color marks data that are duplicate. So you see there's a JOT that wraps some other object, which basically is a JSON-LD object. And in the outer layer, you've got an issuer, issuance date, and so on. And within the JSON-LD object, you have exactly the same information with different claim names, right? So actually, the payload is just the last 3 lines: degree, type, and name. Can we represent that more concisely? Yes, we can. Just look on the other side. That's exactly the same. It just uses the JOT style of representing claims. And this is something that people know and love from OpenID Connect Core, for example, right? That's the way an ID token looks like. So we believe that's one of the reasons why SD.VC is the simpler, more secure, and superior approach, and we're advocating for that in this initiative, right? Because if you look onto from an adoption perspective, I think it's more important to help people that today run OpenID Connect-based systems to adopt the 3-party model, because there are billions of JOTs issued every day. And if we make developers that are familiar with JOTs, make them easier a migration towards wallets, I think that's really huge for getting those concepts adopted. And with that, I come to an end. Thank you very much.